Start recording. Okay. So we left off last week. We were in the middle of the subject of Maris ayin. Okay, Maris ayin, to remind you, is the problem of other people seeing you doing something and making a mistake, that will lead them to have to make a mistake and be over, probably on an Issa D'Oraisa for sure, but possibly even on an Issa D'Rabbanan. Okay, the subject that we came up with is because we learned a halacha in the Shulchan Aruch that says it's asa to cook meat with a woman's milk because of Maris ayin. Okay, but if milk fell into the meat tavshil unintentionally, it's not a problem. It's batel, and it doesn't even need a shear against it. So there's no. After the fact, after the fact, once the mother's milk has fallen into the cholent, you don't have to worry about it. You weren't allowed to do it, but once it's done, it's done. Okay. So we also said that there was the other case of the fish blood in the cup, that that if somebody wanted to drink this fish blood for whatever reason, don't ask. Some people have their fetishes, but if you wanted to drink that, then you would have to put scales on the outside of the cup, or down where the cup is put down, so that you can see that any observer would be able to see that there is that this is fish blood and not animal blood. Okay. Now before we left off last week, at least where my bookmark is from where we left off last week, we had a number of different opinions as to why it is, and what the halacha is with chicken and almond milk and things like that, where me'ikar adin it's mutter, but you can't. But it might be not allowed to do it because of the issues of Maris ayin. Again, I just want to remind everyone, if you're stuck, if you don't know if you need to ask a question, please, I encourage interactivity. It also helps keep me on my toes. So if you want to butt in and ask a question, I really encourage you to do so. Okay, so just to remind you of what we had the Torah Chatas, who is the same as the Ramah, the same person. It says that even like the Maharshal, so he and the Maharshal are on the same page here, that even when eating chicken and almond milk together, one should put almonds next to the milk, even though it's chicken, and chicken with milk would only be a D'Rabbanan in the first place. So you don't even want to let people make a mistake that will lead them to be over on a D'Rabbanan. So he's that strict over there. Okay.
Even though the almond milk looks totally different than the regular milk.
Say that again, please.
Even though the almond milk looks totally different than the regular milk.
So he's not saying that. It obviously looks similar enough to regular milk that it's sort of a whitish fluid, and if you're not focusing very hard on it, then you will then it's possible to think that that's normal milk, as opposed to water or orange juice or something like that, where it's quite obviously different. So clearly there's enough of a similarity that leads us to have a concern. Okay. Then there was the Taz, who said that if you have almonds, you should put them next to the milk. If you have almonds, then you should put them next to the milk, because wherever it's possible to do something that'll make the situation better, to be mataken, then you should do it. But if there are no almonds to be found, then nonetheless he says, okay, so no, you didn't have the almonds to put around, and we're dealing here with something that's maximum. If you would substitute regular milk, it would be an Issa D'Rabbanan. So when it's almond milk, if you don't have the almonds, okay, so carry on. It's all fine. Okay. The Shach.
Question: Does all this thing with the almond milk, or in general, does it depend also on the community or the place where a person's living? In other words, a person's in the area. Yeah.
Yeah, we mentioned we mentioned last week that these kinds of halachas might change from according to the current circumstances. Where nowadays, like you go into the supermarket and there's an entire shelf full of milk substitutes. So it's a lot less likely that someone will make a mistake. I'm not going to paskin anything at this point, and because Lamase, yeah, you're probably on better ground to just serve the almond milk without adding any other information. But if you want to be strict on yourself, it's probably a good thing to add the almonds on there anyway. If it's almond milk or if it's soya milk, what you're going to do? Put beans? I don't know, or just put some sort of siman, you know, a label on it that says parva.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So and the Shach disagrees with the Taz over here and holds like the Marshal, and says that that we even find in cases of Issa Durabanan we're worried about Maris Ayin, and therefore if you didn't have the almonds, you wouldn't be allowed to eat the chicken cooked in the almond milk. Okay, so those are the arguments that we have between the Achronim over here as to what the halacha is going to be. There's actually a very very interesting here from the Nachalas Tzvi, which I wanted to go into over here. So this is now breaking into new ground that we didn't get here last week. The Nachalas Tzvi explains that the Ramah holds like the Shach that there is Maris Ayin even dealing with an Isser Drabanan. Now, why does the Ramah only require you to make a heker by meat and not by chicken? Okay, he says, hang on, is Maris Ayin even? So why does he make a heker by meat and chicken? Is it?
Oh, you break. Oh, you break.
Oh, hang on, let me make sure I'm on the right network.
No, it's me,
Yes,
Joel.
I'm
I
on the
got
right
it.
network. You're good? Okay. You know what it is? It's
What is it?
right. It's the famous echoing Eliezer.
Right.
Okay. Not to worry about it. Okay, we've had this issue before in our Mishnah Shir.
Yeah. Every
So
morning.
so we know it. Welcome on board, by the way. I
Thank
see
you. Welcome. I don't know.
you got over your issues there.
No, I
Okay.
forgot. I forgot to restart my thing.
Okay, so the Nachalas Tzvi says that that the concept of Maris Ayin applies even. The Gemara explains the concept of Maris Ayin applies even b'chadrei chadarim, in private. So even when you're in private, we still have an issue of Maris Ayin, even though nobody's really seeing you. So now. That's only referring to acts that can be misconstrued to appear as an Issa D'Oraisa,
Mm-hmm.
a Torah prohibition. So, for example, if you were busy cooking in private and you had some almond milk and a steak, and whatever your recipe called for almond milk to be poured over your steak, now that you would not be allowed to do even in total private when you know that nobody else is around you, because the mistake that somebody could make would lead to straight away a Torah prohibition. Whereas if the prohibition that we're talking about is only a Durabanan prohibition, then Chadrei Chadarim is actually permitted. So this incidentally, it's not in my notes over here, but according to the Nachalas Tzvi, this would have ramifications for a Ben Eretz Yisrael who's in Chutz La'aretz for second day Yom Tov. Well, for Yom Tov in general, he wouldn't have gotten there on second day Yom Tov. So he's not. So a person from Israel doesn't have a mitzvah, doesn't have a Yom Tov on second day. Okay, other than Rosh Hashanah. But nonetheless, he's not allowed to do any malacha in front of people in Chutz La'aretz, because they're going to look at it and say, "Whoa, oh, so you're allowed to do that on second day," or else they'll just be offended that you did all these malachas. But what's the issue over here? You've got over here possibly a Durabanan, possibly even just a minhag of second day Yom Tov in Chutz La'aretz. Okay, so let's say you've got an Israeli who's in Johannesburg for second day Yom Tov, and he goes to the bathroom, He says, well, I just realized I don't have any toilet paper here. I don't have any tissues here. Let me just tear some toilet paper. So he has no problem with tearing the toilet paper inside there, because in the worst case, he's doing the whole isser of second day Yom Tov is at worst derabanan. So chadrei chadarim, according to Nachlas Tzvi, is not an issue. You'd be allowed to do that. Okay, as long as it's done in private, as long as it's something that's totally in private and nobody will see what he's doing.
So there's no worry about Maris ayin then in that case.
So that's exactly the point of the Nachlas Tzvi, is that Maris ayin is if it's on an Isser D'Oraisa, if one mistake would lead you to make an Isser D'Oraisa, then you cannot do it even b'chadrei chadarim.
Mhm.
Okay, but if it's something that the Isser itself is only an Isser D'Rabanan, then a chadrei chadarim becomes permitted. Okay, so that means that according to Nachlas Tzvi, cooking the chicken in milk, chicken in almond milk, is fine as long as it's in private. And in private, he also comes to explain that the members of your household is also considered in private. Okay, again, emphasizing that this is only when we're talking about an Issur D'Rabbanan that you would make the mistake on, if it's chicken with almond milk. But meat beef would not be permitted. Okay, and there's also the Pri Megadim paskins like this as well. Okay, now there's now getting back to the subject of mother's milk. I'm going to throw a question to the floor and get your brains working a little bit. Why is it that mother's milk is kosher bichlal? Why is it kosher?
It's a permitted exception.
It's an exception. Why is it an exception?
Because babies need to drink mother's milk.
Okay,
but they're
babies
not
do.
about
That's
to
good.
drink.
But babies are not bar mitzvah. Maybe mother's milk really should be prohibited, but for babies, it's obviously that's the way Hashem meant it. So mother's milk is kosher for babies because they're not bar mitzvah and they're allowed to do it. But let me just refine the question. We have a principle that anything that the kol hayotze min tahor tahor, kol hayotze min tamei tamei, anything that comes from a tahor animal is kosher, and what comes from a tamei animal is not kosher. So if you want to drink milk, it has to come from a kosher animal. Milk that comes out of a non-kosher animal is aser. Okay, the same thing comes. The same thing applies to secretions. For example, honey. Why is honey even kosher? A bee isn't kosher because honey is not a secretion of a bee. Okay, honey is just it's processed from the nectar of the flowers. The bee just gathers it and stores it in an efficient way. Okay, but it's not. But the honey is not an excretion of the bee because otherwise the honey would be prohibited. However, royal jelly, you've heard of royal jelly, that is actually an excretion of the bee. So royal jelly is treif.
So what?
Royal jelly. You sometimes get these supplements that have royal jelly in them, and they're supposed to make you very strong because royal jelly is what they feed if they feed royal jelly to a bee larva, it will become a queen.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, that's how they create queens in the hive. Okay. So all these royal jelly vitamin supplements and whatever, I'm not saying that they're treif, but because they are, there's a little bit more lumdus because is it considered food? Is it because it's been turned into a non-edible format? You're swallowing a capsule or whatever, so it may not be derech achila, and there might be heterim to have it, but if you had to have some sort of seasoning that was made out of royal jelly, that would not be allowed at all. That's bee excretion, and that comes from a tamei creature. Okay, so we wouldn't be allowed to eat that.
Gelatin? Gelatin is
Gelatin, exactly. So gelatin that comes out of a non-kosher animal is non-kosher. Gelatin that comes from a fish is kosher, as long as it's from a kosher fish. Although gelatin again is that's actually part of the animal. We're talking here about what comes out, because gelatin is not an excretion.
Right.
Okay, so the question really comes with milk. Okay, because milk has to come from a kosher animal. Is a human kosher? No, no, you're not allowed to eat human flesh. So why is it that mother's milk is kosher?
It's an exception.
And we see that it's kosher because when the Shulchan Aruch says that if mother's milk had been expressed and it fell into a pot, you don't have to worry about how much fell into it. You can just disregard it completely. It's considered totally parva. Even if it falls into your cholent, a whole cup of mother's milk falls into your cholent, ignore it. It's not there. We just completely ignore it, and it's 100% kosher. You know, we should be asking, like, why isn't it aser altogether? Okay, so here's an interesting bit of lamdas for you. The reason why let me ask you another question just before we get into the lamdas. Well, I mean, this itself is lamdas. How do we know that it's prohibited to eat human flesh?
They don't have cloven hooves and chew the cud.
Okay, that's a good answer. That's actually a very good answer because we have simanim about animals. But then again, that is said about behema. Okay, the cloven hooves and chewing the cud is said only about behemoths and chayas, and humans do not fall into that category. Fish, for example, do not have to have cloven hooves and chew the cud. They've got a different set of criteria. Okay, and you know, we learn about fish have to have fins and scales. We learn about their criteria for birds as well. What is the criteria that rules out humans? And let me ask you that question. What is it? What rules out humans? Why is it that you would not be allowed to eat human flesh?
Elohim, it's supposed to be it's supposed to be like Hashem. It's supposed to. Would that be a reason? That would.
What do you mean by that? Because we're B'Tselem Elokim.
Yeah.
Shoma.
Okay, so what about B'Tselem Elokim rules out eating it?
And you shall not murder.
Okay, so somebody died without being, you know, just a natural death. Okay. Yeah, you see, now there's a general principle actually in the Torah that if you want to say that something is prohibited, you have to come with a proof that it's prohibited. So, you know, I found this actually just like to go completely off topic. When there was like all the controversy and when people, you know, there's a lot of controversy still, I suppose, if you ever get into it, about the concept of cloning. You know, people. Yeah, I heard arguments of, particularly from Christian fundamentalists, that this falls under some kind of prohibition called playing God. And my response to that was Mahechatesi. Who told you that that there's an issa called playing God? Where in Torah do you find some sort of prohibition that says you're not allowed to play God? I mean, we're always playing God. We're trying to emulate God the entire time. God is creative. We're creative as well. And to tell you the truth, there is no prohibition against cloning animals, or cloning a human for that matter. Who said there was a prohibition against cloning a human? It doesn't say anywhere in the Torah that you can't do it. So if you want to say that you can't prove that you're not allowed to clone humans, okay, bring me a proof. Bring me a proof why it's prohibited. Because anyone who wants to, and we saw this, Eliezer, we saw this recently in Mishnah, that if somebody wants to come and be machmir, then the burden of proof falls on them. Why do you think that the halach has to be machmir? Okay. So here too, I'm asking the question: why is human flesh prohibited? And it's a very obscure reason. Why? Because we have a pasuk that says "Zos asher tochelu." This is what you're allowed to eat. I think this is in Emor. I'm not 100% sure. Let me just check my footnotes. Yeah, that's in Emor. Okay. Zos asher tochelu. This is what you're allowed to eat. This, excluding anything else. In other words, we give a list of behemoths, we give a list of fish, we give a list of birds, we give a list of even locusts that we're allowed to eat. That's it. Those are the only creatures that we're allowed to eat. That rules out humans. Okay, so that verse rules out humans. Just it's very obscure, but nonetheless, it is if humans are not on the list of approved foods. Okay, now that zos asher tochelu is it phrased as a positive or is it phrased as a negative? Zos asher tochelu. This is what you should eat. It's a positive.
It's positive, yeah.
That's right. It's a positive statement.
Yeah,
This is
right.
what you should eat. Okay. Now, when we learn a negative commandment out of a positive statement, that's called halav haba miklal aseh. Okay, a negative commandment that is derived from a positive commandment. Okay, a negative commandment that is derived from a positive commandment is actually considered the equivalent of a positive commandment. Okay, so so for example, we also have a mitzvah of shechita. Okay, the Torah speaks about it. You have to. I don't remember the exact words. I'm not going to try and quote the pasuk, but the basic gist of the pasuk is, "You shall slaughter your meat as I have commanded you." Okay. Now, does that mean that you have a mitzvah to say, "Oh, there's an animal, I must go and slaughter it"? No, you don't. No, a person can live a completely Torah life without ever having slaughtered an animal. Okay, and he can live a completely Torah life without ever having eaten meat. Elamai, what's it telling you is that if you want to eat meat, you have to slaughter it. Okay, if you want to eat meat, you have to slaughter it. That means that you're not allowed to eat meat if you didn't slaughter it. That's really the implication. That's really the implication, is that if you didn't slaughter the meat, you're not allowed to eat it, or somebody else didn't slaughter it. Okay, so now that also is a lav haba miklal aseh. It's a negative commandment, but it's derived from a positive statement, which is that you have to slaughter your meat. Now, there are other commandments as well. There's also, you're not allowed to eat nevela. Okay, you're not allowed to eat an animal that's died without a shechita. So, as a matter of fact, eating non-kosher meat, eating treif-shechted animals, from a non-kosher butchery, whatever, is two problems. There's one, nevela, and two, eating meat that hasn't been shechted. Okay, so you've got a negative and a positive, and that has various ramifications in halacha. I mean, either way, it's aser, even if it was just an isser. But the difference is that for example, there are many differences. But for example, we also have a principle of an aseh doche lo taseh. That if you have a positive mitzvah, it pushes aside a negative mitzvah. Examples of this include like shatnez, and shatnez is a negative mitzvah. But if you have a linen garment that needs to have woolen fringes, because tzitzis has to be made of wool, so you have to put the woolen tzitzis onto the linen garment, because the aseh pushes away the lo taseh. But when it comes to an aseh and a lo taseh together, an aseh can't push away an aseh and a lo taseh. Okay, so that's just a little bit of a side note over here. Now, so coming back to our question about chalav isha, and remember we said that only you have to secretions from a kosher animal are kosher, and from a non-kosher animal are non-kosher. But the lamdas over here from the Rambam is that this lamdas only applies to an animal that is prohibited from a negative commandment. Okay, so we know that chazir is prohibited from a negative commandment. Camels are prohibited as a negative commandment. Therefore, their milk that comes out is also prohibited. Humans are not prohibited by a negative commandment; they're prohibited by a positive commandment. And that is why the Rambam explains that the milk that comes out of a human is not prohibited. Now that was obscure, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. So next time you're drinking some mother's milk, you must realize that this is some amazing lumdas that the Rambam brings down over here. I mean, obviously it was known before, but the Rambam is the one who comes and explains this amazing reasoning as to why we consider mother's milk kosher.
And we think about Moshe Rabbeinu, who wouldn't nurse from what's her name? I forgot her name.
That's a different reason. Now, the reason given for why Moshe Rabbeinu would refusing to nurse from the Egyptian Egyptian what they called wet nurses,
right.
is given as the fact that they were eating all these creepy crawlies, shkatzim v'ramasim. So and those things had an issue of a particular issue of timtum halev. Okay, and that was going to come out in their milk, and they said, is the mouth that's going to speak with Hashem on Har Sinai, is that going to be like having this milk that's been processed out of shkatzim v'ramasim? And it's dafka the bugs that they're concerned about, because nowhere in any of our sources do we have any Masorah that says that Moshe ate kosher inside Paro's palace when he was growing up. Who said that he ate kosher? Where on earth was he going to get kosher food from? He didn't. Pasha, nobody says it. The only thing that he was makpid on as a baby was not to have the milk that was made out of processed bugs.
There's no Chabad house in Egypt.
Yeah. So Lester, yes.
Just to summarize this up, to sum this up, can you positively drink mother's milk? Or
absolutely yes.
If it's an accident, then it doesn't matter. If I wanted to have a glass of mother's milk with my steak, would that be all right?
Let's just your first question you asked is mother's milk all right? Are you allowed to drink mother's milk? Yes. If you want to put mother's milk in your coffee because you don't have any of the regular cow's milk, absolutely yes, mutar, 100%. The question is, are you allowed to put that lechatchila into a meat dish? And we're saying, well, no, you shouldn't do that because that doesn't look right. But if it happened b'diavad, okay, it happened. No, move on. Okay. Now, so we said in the halacha. Yeah.
One more question, just going back to mother's milk. So mother's milk in general, if for some reason, for example, if a mother prepares it for a baby and for some reason it's not going to work, or she has too much, she's engorged, and the baby doesn't need that much. Officially,
she expresses it. That's I know personally with my children, we expressed my wife's milk, and that also helped me to do some of the nursing rounds.
And that could be
she could sleep and I could bottle feed with expressed milk.
But how about other kids? I'm saying based on what you said before, kids or other people in the family could just drink. I'm saying, assuming they wanted to.
Totally. Right. Yeah. 100% kosher. Okay. Right. Now, now we started off this whole discussion with the halacha that says, and I'm going to read this again just to get this fresh in our minds again. It's asur to cook meat with mother's milk because of maris ayin. Okay, that's the point that we're talking about here, and then we're talking about b'diavad. If it happened, then whatever. But the halacha in the Shulchan Aruch is that you're not allowed to do this lechatchila. Okay, now the source of this halacha is from the Rashba. But the Darkei Moshe is, again, that's the Ramah. That's the same person. The Darkei Moshe was his original commentary that he wrote himself, and then he adapted it to be the Ramah commentary inside the Shulchan Aruch. Okay, so the Darkei Moshe says that the Rashba appears to contradict himself. On the one hand, when we had meat, okay, when we had meat and chalav tameah, so in other words, kosher meat and or from a kosher animal, and milk that's from a camel. Okay, he said it was 100% mutar to do that, to cook those together. Okay, but and apparently there was no problem of maris ayin over there. But now we're saying that when it comes to mother's milk, now suddenly we've got a problem of maris ayin. Okay, so Darkei Moshe is asking, why is cooking mother's milk worse than cooking the meat with milk from a camel?
But how could that be mutter? The milk is
no, I'm saying that of course the milk is asur, but we're talking about, let's say the Jew is working for a non-Jew, and the non-Jew says, I've got a recipe here that requires meat to be cooked with camel milk, and the Jew says, I can do that. And the Ramah says, knock yourself out. I mean, not the Ramah, the Rashba. Even the Rashba comes and says that you can do that. And meanwhile, the Rashba is saying, no, but you can't do that with mother's milk. So why? Why is it worse? So he's not the only person to ask that question, and many of the Achronim have tried to come up with answers as to why the Rashba should say such a thing. So we'll start with the Taz. So the Taz answers that we only have to make a gezerah. That when you hear the word gezerah, that's Rabbanan. Okay, we only have to make such a gezerah of maris ayin by food that's kosher to eat. Okay, that's because it's similar to basa b'chalav. Because your meat was kosher, your milk is kosher, you cook them together, and suddenly everything becomes aser. Okay. However, when cooking non-kosher food, even though it may look like one is cooking basa b'chalav, they're inherently different because in this situation, no Jew is going to come to eat this. You can see whatever the circumstances are. The Jew is working for the non-Jew, and he's been asked to cook the meat with non-kosher milk. So there's no reason to make a gezerah over here. Nobody's going to come to eat it. And you can see the situation just doesn't lend itself to making an error. Whereas with mother's milk, everything is kosher in the first place. This can lead to mistakes. That's the opinion of the Taz. The Shach comes up with three possibilities. Okay. Yeah.
No.
Oh, okay. So the first possibility that the Shach toys with is that when the Rashba says that chalav tameh is mutar, he's telling us me'ikar adin, saying really me'ikar adin, but it's you're allowed to do it. However, he would also say that there's maris ayin in the case of basa tameh or chalav tameh. So in other words, really he's not contradicting himself. It's just in the previous case where he was saying that it was okay. It was just like theoretically okay, but in practice you shouldn't do it. Okay, and the reason he has to tell us Me'ikar Adin is because there are cases where we don't worry about Maris Ayin, for example, in the case of an illness. However, the Shach himself crosses off this as a possibility because the simple reading is that by Tameh there's not there's not even Maris Ayin, and that the actual halacha that the Rashba is saying is that it is actually mutar to cook the meat in camel milk. Okay, so he rules that possibility out. Second possibility that the Shach comes up with is that there's a difference between cooking and eating. Okay? There's no reason to make a gezerah on cooking because there are many reasons why someone may be cooking chalav tameh with basa tahor or vice versa. Okay? For example, somebody's sick, he's working for a goy, whatever the case. But by achila, when somebody is actually eating something, okay, there's you can see if the person is sick or if this if this is like for medication or whatever, and if somebody's not sick, then you have to have a gezerah of maris because of maris ayin. Somebody's gonna come and eat this meat with cooked with mother's milk, and people are gonna look and say, oh, this is all mutar stuff, and now you're gonna come to make a mistake, okay. And so when the Rashba and the Mechaber say that it's asur to cook, really the meaning that they're saying is that it's asur to eat it. The cooking is fine, but eating it is the problem. Okay? And the third answer that the Shach noodles over is that it's easily discernible that basa tameh or chalav tameh is being cooked because of their appearance, because they look visibly different from the kosher version. However, in the case of mother's milk, we do need to make a gezerah because the difference between mother's milk and regular milk is not noticeable. Okay, it's a theoretical thought over there, but my feeling is that doesn't really wash, and I don't think the Shach thought it washed either. I think he was just throwing it as a possibility, but he doesn't actually hold by that. We see that he actually holds by his second reason in just a minute. Okay, so. La'alacha, the Taz holds that there's no maris ayin of basa b'chalav, okay, by non-kosher food. So therefore, there's no reason to asur cooking basa tameh and chalav tahor because nobody's going to mix it up with basa b'chalav. Okay, but so therefore he is disagreeing with the Ramah, but he says he feels like he can't come out right out and say I just rule differently for the Ramah. He said, if it was just up to me, I would have paskened it was mutar, but the Ramah clearly says it's asur, and therefore he says, I'm not going to come and say it's mutar. Just out of deference to the Ramah, who he sees as being, level above him, and he just can't bring himself to permit what the Ramah prohibited. Okay, the Shach, as we just said, he holds by the second reason, which is that it's a difference between bishul and achila, of cooking and eating. Therefore, he's arguing with the Rama. He holds that basa tameya and chalav tahor is mutar to cook lechatchila. Okay, it's mutar to cook it lechatchila because there's no maris ayin. So therefore, furthermore, even chicken and almond milk is mutar to cook lechatchila because there's no maris ayin by cooking. It's just the cooking that's that's okay. But therefore, almonds do not need to be placed by the pot, even when it's meat. He's saying, because cooking is a different issue. It's only because there are lots of different reasons. To repeat, there are lots of different reasons why somebody might be cooking milk and meat together. It might be because he has to give it to a chole. But when the people are going to sit down and eat, whoa, okay, now we've got to be careful about maris ayin. So he says that even if you're cooking beef in almond milk, you don't need to bother with maris ayin putting almonds around the pot. This is just talking about cooking.
It's interesting because the pasuk specifically states you should not cook.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Stated. That's right. But the distinction he's making is because the cooking, as we said, could be for lots of different reasons why there's a heter to cook. Okay. But when it comes to eating, it's difficult to make up stories. Okay. Now, this is I think the greatest one over here is the Be'er Heitev. The Be'er Heitev comes up with this with a really clear-minded way of looking at the situation. He says that in all these cases we are actually dealing with bishul. We're saying that cooking is the and so he's disagreeing with the Shach's interpretation over here. He says the gezerah of maris ayin applies in a case where one mistake in an assumption will lead to a transgression of an issur d'oraisa. So if you make one mistake, if somebody says, then an observer could say, oh, it's now I'm going, this is permitted, and then he's going to come and do the same thing, and he's going to be over on a d'oraisa. Okay, but in a case where a person needs to make two false assumptions in order to transgress a Torah prohibition, there's no need to make a gezerah of maris ayin. Okay, so in other words, it's easy to make one mistake, but it's unlikely to make two mistakes. So there's a gezerah of maris ayin not to cook basa tameya and chalav tahor, right? Because it's easy to make one mistake and think that the basa was kosher. Okay, you might think that it was kosher meat, and therefore, okay, so cooking, so therefore it makes one mistake, and now he's over in a d'oraisa because he's cooked basa b'chalav. Okay, but in the case of chicken and almond milk, he's got to make two mistakes. He's got to first make the mistake of thinking that the chicken is meat, is beef, and the second mistake he's got to think that the almond milk is real milk, is cow milk. So when the two mistakes, says the Be'er Heitev, if you had to make two mistakes, don't worry about it. Okay, so that's the great lamdas of the Be'er Heitev. Let's see if we can get through this quickly because we're almost at the end of this chapter here. So the Taz says that cooking chicken and milk is asur because of maris ayin, even though it's only an issur d'Rabbanan. Okay, this Taz says three reasons for being careful. So with the idea of this, where the Be'er Heitev seems to think that cooking chicken and almond milk would be permitted there because it's two mistakes. The Taz says nonetheless we still have to be strict by chicken and milk for three possible reasons. Okay, one, we want to be stricter by chicken than by treifas because there actually is a Tan in the Mishnah who holds that chicken is also prohibited min Torah with milk. Okay, we don't hold that lahalacha, but it's good to be stricter because there was a Tana who actually held that it was asur min Torah. Okay, that's one. Number two, sometimes chicken looks like meat. Okay, so it's easy for people to make a mistake and think that beef is being cooked with milk. And the third thing is that people shouldn't think that the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi Aglili, who holds that it's completely mutar to cook chicken with milk, to eat chicken cooked with milk. Okay, because that's another Tana in the Mishnah who's like completely lenient, and we don't want people to think that the halacha is like him. So therefore, a number of reasons why he says you should be stringent with chicken and milk. Okay, so the Taz concludes in general from the fact that the Rama says that it's asur lechatchila. We see that in the case of a chole she'ein bo sakana, if it's not a threat to life, you're allowed to cook meat with chalav mesa, milk that was extracted from the animal after shechita. So that's which is not milk d'oraisa, or milk with tame meat, or vice versa. Okay, so the same din applies to cooking chicken with milk. Okay, so in other words, he would permit it. He would permit it, even though in general he prohibits it. But for a case of a sick person, he would nonetheless permit it. So now comes finally what you've all been waiting for: halacha l'maaseh. Halacha l'maaseh. We say that there is an isser of maris ayin to cook basar tameh with chalav tahor, or vice versa, and to cook chicken with milk. Okay, we don't allow these things because I think we hold like this reason of the Be'er Heitev. One mistake, and you're doing a d'oraisa. Okay, but in the case of cooking chicken with almond milk in private, there's no maris ayin. When it's in private, you don't have to worry about maris ayin. In public, put almonds next to it. Okay, just to make sure that nobody makes a mistake. And in the case of chicken and chalav tameh, there's no maris ayin at all. In any case, it's not going to be eaten by a Jew.
So if the cow is shechted and there's milk in there, we can use this milk.
Yes. Yes, but.
How does that hold on to the fact that if there's a calf inside?
Man, you're really stirring around the pot now.
With milk.
With milk. So milk is only considered milchik when it came out during the animal's lifetime. If you cut open the udder, that milk that's inside there is actually like pretty problematic in a couple of directions.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not really milk. I don't see it in my notes over here, but as far as I recall, you have to treat that milk as being prohibited to cook with meat and prohibited to cook with milk, because coming out of a shechted cow's body, anything that comes out of the shechted cow is now suddenly considered fleishiks. But on the other hand, it looks milchik, and I mean, eating a cow's udder is a whole chapter in itself in the Shulchan Aruch. Okay, the cow's udder is saturated with milk, and there are all sorts of issues with eating it as is. You have to take a whole bunch of steps to make sure that if the desire so takes you and you just got to taste cow's udder, it's going to be a business.
It would be fleishik. It would be fleishik though. The milk, you said.
Of course, it's all fleishik. It's all fleishik, but you got to take steps. I'm cutting to the chase over here, but you're going to have to take steps to squeeze out as much of that milk as you possibly can, and then even then you're still going to have to barbecue it. You're not going to be allowed to cook it. Okay, so that's getting up to the.
I remember that when I'm making my steak.
Okay, we're getting ahead of ourselves because that's for a future shear, but I'm giving you a sneak preview. Okay, that's it for tonight. Questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks everyone. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Laila Tov.
Laila Tov.